You know, there's a very specific smell in a boardroom when a deal is about to fall apart, but the parties don't realize it yet. It's the smell of cheap champagne mixed with expensive perfume and absolute, blind self-confidence. That's exactly the smell that hung in the air in our conference room on the 42nd floor when David and Chloe decided they had just pulled off the deal of the century. My name is Richard. I'm a managing partner at a venture capital fund that specializes in deep tech. We don't invest in food delivery apps or social networks for dogs. We invest in things that change the physics and chemistry of the world. And that's exactly why I was sitting in that chair, watching these two people and silently drinking mineral water while they popped open a bottle of Dom Perignon. David stood by the window, with a panoramic view of the financial district stretching out before him. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, with a tie that I was certain cost more than my first car. He held a glass in his hand and looked out at the city with the expression of a man who had just bought that view. Chloe sat across from me, lounging back in her leather chair. She was the CEO of their company, EcoPoly, and her posture screamed that she'd already spent my $10 million, even though we hadn't even signed the final term sheet. "Richard, darling," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that condescending sweetness that people use when they're used to always getting their way. "I know our lawyers are still fussing with the final edits, but let's not be formalists. You see the potential. We're changing the biodegradable polymers industry. In 5 years, every circuit board in the world will be wrapped in our material. To your health, Richard, and to our shared future." She raised her glass. David turned from the window, his face breaking into a wide, smug smile. "To the future," he echoed, walking to the table and clinking glasses with Chloe. "Richard, you've made the right decision. By investing in us, you're investing in the inevitable." I looked at them. I looked at the bubbles rising in their glasses. I looked at the folder of documents lying in the middle of the table. In that folder was a draft agreement to purchase shares worth $10 million for 20% of the company. That meant they'd valued their startup at $50 million post-money. $50 million. For a company that had only existed for 2 years, had no manufacturing facility of its own, and, as I discovered the night before, didn't even own the main asset upon which their entire presentation was built. If you love stories where arrogant founders get a lesson in corporate reality, and where cold calculation shatters rosy dreams, be sure to subscribe right now. Because what happened in that room 10 minutes later will make you applaud. But to understand why I didn't stop them when they started opening the champagne, you need to know how David and Chloe even got to this boardroom, and who really created what they were so brazenly selling. To understand the scale of their audacity, you need to look at their product. EcoPoly is a revolutionary biodegradable polymer that can replace traditional plastic in microelectronics. It dissolves in ordinary water within 48 hours, leaving no toxic traces, yet withstands temperatures up to 200 degrees Celsius. This is the holy grail for the industry. Smartphone manufacturers, laptop makers, medical implant producers, all of them were lining up to buy this technology. And David and Chloe knew it perfectly well. They weren't just selling a material, they were selling a monopoly on the future. But here's the catch. David isn't a scientist. He's never held a test tube in his life except maybe in high school chemistry. He's a salesman. Charismatic, charming, able to sell snow in winter. And Chloe? Chloe was his boss at their previous company, where they both worked in business development. She was tough, ambitious, and utterly devoid of technical knowledge. She could read financial reports and manipulate people, but she couldn't tell a polymer from polyethylene. So where did the technology come from? It was created by Sarah, David's wife. Sarah is a materials scientist with a PhD. A quiet, introverted, brilliant woman who spent her best years in a laboratory, not at corporate parties. She, in her garage and later in a university lab, developed the EcoPoly formula. She spent thousands of hours testing compositions, racking her brain over molecular bonds, sacrificing sleep and personal time. David was there. He helped with business plans, brought her coffee, told her how proud he was. But when it came time to monetize the invention, David understood one simple thing. If he left Sarah as a co-founder, he'd have to share 50% of the company with her. But if he fired her and took the technology for himself using legal loopholes, he'd become the sole owner of a billion-dollar idea. And he did it. He conspired with Chloe. They created a fake consulting firm that supposedly invested in Sarah's early-stage development. They made her sign a bunch of documents that she, being an honest and trusting person, didn't even read carefully because she believed in her husband. And then, one fine day, they fired her. Chloe personally called Sarah into her office. She told her the company was changing strategy, that her role as a lab technician was no longer needed, and that she'd be better off focusing on family and children. They paid her a modest severance, took her badge, and kicked her out of the building. The next day, they registered EcoPoly and started raising their investment round, presenting Chloe as the visionary CEO and David as the brilliant COO. They erased Sarah from the story. They didn't even mention her name in the pitch deck. When I first saw their presentation, something felt off. Usually, when I see founders who talk so smoothly but answer technical questions so superficially, I go into paranoid mode. I hired my best team to conduct due diligence, a comprehensive legal and financial review. And that review would prove fatal for them. My senior attorney, Elena, spent 3 weeks digging through their documents. She checked every transaction, every contract, every non-disclosure agreement. And last night at 10 o'clock, she called me. "Richard," she said. And in her voice I heard that note that always precedes either a huge problem or a huge opportunity. "We have a problem with the chain of title on the intellectual property. The main patent for the polymer hasn't been assigned to the company." I frowned, sitting in my home office. "What do you mean, not assigned?" Chloe said all IP assets were contributed to the charter capital upon incorporation.
No, Richard, Elena replied.
They contributed a license to the charter capital, an exclusive, perpetual, irrevocable license to use the patent. But the patent itself, the title of ownership, belongs to an individual. Who? David?
No.
Not Chloe either. The patent is registered in the name of Sarah Jenkins, David's wife. I froze. I slowly put down my pen. "Elena, are you sure?" "Absolutely." I checked the patent office database. The patent was issued 3 years ago, and in the inventor and applicant fields, there's only one name, Sarah Jenkins. Moreover, Richard, I found the original license agreement they provided us. There's a small clause in the termination section. What clause? Clause 14.3. The license is automatically and immediately terminated if the licensee, their company, commits actions that damage the licensor's business reputation, or if the licensee terminates the licensor's employment without just cause. I laughed. A quiet, dry laugh of a man who had just seen his poker opponent show his cards without knowing it. "Elena," I said, "prepare an official notice. Tomorrow morning at exactly 9 a.m., we send it to Sarah Jenkins. We're not calling David. We're not warning Chloe. We're just activating clause 14.3. Are you sure, Richard? This will kill the deal." "Elena, the deal is already dead. They just don't know it yet. And I want to watch them drink their champagne when they find out their company is worth exactly $0. And now I'm sitting in this boardroom, watching Chloe take a sip of expensive wine, and waiting. I know that right now, at this very second, a courier is handing Sarah Jenkins an envelope with the official notice from her husband and his mistress. And I know that Sarah has exactly one phone call to turn this room from a hall of triumph into a hall of shame. To understand exactly how we caught them, you need to know what due diligence means in our world. It's not just checking the books to see how much they spent on coffee and office rent. It's a full-scale forensic investigation. When we're committing $10 million, we hire a team of top lawyers, auditors, and technical experts who literally dissect the company like surgeons. And David and Chloe, in their blind self-confidence, thought they could fool us. They'd prepared a beautiful virtual data room, all their financial reports, marketing strategies, and legal documents. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. My senior attorney, Elena, can smell a lie from a mile away. She worked at one of the largest law firms on Wall Street before joining me. She'd seen billion-dollar corporations collapse. And when she started digging into their IP documents, she immediately spotted an anomaly. David and Chloe claimed they'd developed the polymer themselves. But their technical reports referenced research conducted 3 years earlier, research done in a university lab. Elena requested the original lab notebooks. David sent scans. But Elena asked for the originals for independent expert review. And then the panic started. They stalled, made excuses, said the notebooks were lost during the move. At that point, Elena knew they were lying. She hired a private investigator who, in 2 days, uncovered that all the key experiments had been conducted by Sarah Jenkins. Moreover, the investigator found Sarah's former lab assistant who, for $5,000, told us everything. How Sarah slept in the lab, how she created the formula, and how David gradually pushed her out of the project, changing server passwords and firing her best assistants. But the most important discovery was made by Elena in the legal department. She found the original license agreement that Sarah had signed with their company EcoPoly on the day she was fired. David was so confident in his superiority that he hadn't even had that agreement reviewed by his lawyers. He just shoved it at Sarah, knowing she was in a vulnerable state, and she signed it just to leave and move on with her life. But Sarah wasn't in a vulnerable state. Sarah was furious. And that fury was cold as liquid nitrogen. When Elena sent me that agreement, I read it with growing admiration. It was a masterpiece of legal thinking. Sarah hadn't just given them a license. She'd created the perfect trap. Clause 14.3, which I mentioned earlier, wasn't just a formality. It stated, "The license is immediately and irrevocably terminated if the licensee takes actions aimed at alienating the intellectual property rights to third parties without the licensor's written consent, or in the event of the licensor's unfair termination." David fired her. He was alienating the rights by selling the company to me. He'd violated both conditions. The license was dead. And without the license, their company had no right to produce, sell, or even demonstrate their main product. Their $50 million valuation evaporated in 1 second. All they had left was an office, a few laptops, and a mountain of debt. If you think Sarah just sat around waiting for us to find everything, you're very wrong. Sarah called me herself the day before this meeting. She knew about the due diligence. She knew we were investigating them, and she knew we'd find the truth. She called me late at night. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the steel in it. "Richard," she said, "I know your team is digging into the IP. I want to save you time. The patent is in my name. They have a license, but it's automatically terminated as soon as they try to sell a stake in the company. I don't want you to invest in a shell, but I want you to help me destroy them." I was stunned. Most people in her situation would just want money, a quiet settlement, a discreet divorce. But Sarah wanted justice. She wanted David and Chloe to get what they deserved. And she proposed a plan. "Richard," she continued, "don't cancel the meeting. Go. Let them open the champagne. Let them feel like they're on top of the world. And then I'll activate clause 14.3, and you'll be a witness to their empire crumbling." I agreed. It was too beautiful to refuse. And so we're back in the boardroom. David and Chloe have already poured the champagne. They're clinking glasses, laughing, talking about buying a house in the Hamptons and a yacht. Chloe is already choosing the color of the sails. David talks about finally buying that Aston Martin he's always dreamed of. They're building castles in the air on a foundation that just turned to dust. At that moment, my phone vibrates. It's a message from Elena. Notice delivered. Sarah signed the license termination. The patent office has received a request to block any transactions with the IP. Everything's ready. I put the phone in my pocket and pick up my glass of mineral water. "David, Chloe," I say, and my voice is so quiet that they both fall silent and turn to me. "I'm glad you're celebrating, but I think you're drinking champagne a little too early." David frowns. His smile fades slightly. "Richard, what are you talking about? We're about to sign the term sheet. There are just a few legal formalities left." "Formalities?" I repeat, taking a sip of water. "Yes, you're right. Formalities. For instance, the formality of owning the asset you're selling me. Chloe, please tell me, whose name is patent US 9982145 for the biodegradable polymer registered under?" Chloe blinks. She looks at David. David shrugs, his confidence starting to crack. The companies, of course, Chloe replies, but a hint of uncertainty creeps into her voice. We contributed all IP to the charter capital. No, Chloe, I say, opening the folder in front of me. You contributed a license to the charter capital. The patent is registered in the name of Sarah Jenkins. And exactly 3 minutes ago, my legal team received from her an official notice of license termination based on Clause 14.3 of your agreement. Silence falls over the room, so deep you can hear the bubbles popping in the champagne glasses. David goes pale. He slowly sets down his glass. His hand is shaking. What are you talking about? He whispers. This is a joke? Sarah couldn't. She signed all the papers. She resigned. She has no rights to the company. She has no rights to the company. I agree. But she has rights to the product. Without her license, David, your company has no right to produce a single gram of that polymer. Moreover, if you try to sell it, she'll sue you for patent infringement. And that, in turn, means the asset you're selling me is worth exactly $0. Chloe jumps up from her chair. Her face reddens with rage. This is a bluff, she shouts. You're just trying to drive the price down. David, call her. Tell her to stop this hysterics. David grabs his phone with trembling hands and dials Sarah's number. He holds it to his ear. I watch him wait for the dial tone. 1, 2, 3. And then Sarah answers. But it's not voicemail. It's her. And she's put it on speaker because I can hear her voice coming from David's phone speaker. David, Sarah says. Her voice is crystal clear and calm. I see you're calling from the office line. I hope you're not wasting corporate minutes on personal calls. You have that important investor meeting today. Sarah, David croaks. What have you done? What did you send to these people? Cancel it immediately. This is sabotage. You're destroying my life. Your life, David? Sarah laughs softly. You fired me, stole my work, brought your mistress into my office, and called me a lab technician. I'm just protecting my intellectual property. As you taught me, David, business is business. Sarah, please. David's voice turns pleading. He forgets about Chloe, forgets about me, forgets about the whole world. Let's talk. Let's meet. I'll explain everything. I'll pay you. Name your price. My price. David, Sarah replies, and her voice rings with ice, is your complete bankruptcy. I've already filed documents with the patent office. I've already sent notices to all your potential clients, including Apple and Samsung. They know your product is illegal. Your contracts are void. Your company is dead. Enjoy the champagne, David. It must have been very expensive. Click. She hung up. David stands in the middle of the room, holding his phone like a dead insect. His face is gray, his eyes empty. He looks at me, then at Chloe. Chloe doesn't look worried. She looks furious. She walks up to David and snatches the phone from him. You idiot! She hisses in his face. You couldn't control your own wife? You couldn't make her sign the right papers? Because of you, we're losing $10 million. David explodes. He grabs Chloe's arm. Because of me? This is your company. Chloe, you were the CEO. You were supposed to check the documents. You were supposed to know. They start screaming at each other. They've forgotten about me. They've forgotten I'm even in the room. They're tearing into each other like two cornered wolves. It's a pathetic, humiliating spectacle. Two people who 5 minutes ago considered themselves kings of the world, now destroying each other over a piece of paper they hadn't even bothered to read. I calmly stand up, button my jacket, and pick up my folder. David, Chloe, I say, raising my voice over their shouting. The meeting is over. My lawyers will be in touch with yours regarding compensation for my team's time spent on due diligence. And Chloe, I start looking for a new job if I were you, because after what I'm about to tell Wall Street, you won't even get hired to wash dishes at a venture fund. I turned and walked out of the boardroom. I walked down the hallway, listening to their argument continuing behind the closed door. I felt great, like after a successful hunt. But most importantly, I felt immense respect for Sarah. She wasn't just smart. She was ruthless. And she had just given me the best lesson in corporate warfare I'd ever seen. But the story doesn't end there. Because David and Chloe weren't going to give up that easily. They were cornered, and a cornered animal is dangerous. Over the next 2 weeks, they tried everything to get revenge on Sarah and save their business. They hired the most expensive lawyers. They tried to sue Sarah. They tried to blackmail me. And that's where the really interesting part begins. Because Sarah was ready for that too. She didn't just revoke the license. She had prepared several more surprises for them. Ones they had no idea about. Surprises that would turn their lives into a living hell. Exactly 2 weeks had passed since that day in the boardroom. I thought David and Chloe, after such a crushing blow, would quietly wind down their operations, lay off their staff, and start looking for jobs. But I underestimated human stupidity multiplied by desperation. Instead of surrendering, they hired the most aggressive and expensive law firm in Silicon Valley, Vance and Sterling. This firm was famous for not just winning cases, but destroying opponents financially and morally, dragging out processes for years until the opposition ran out of money. David and Chloe sued Sarah. They accused her of breaching fiduciary duties, unfair competition, and willful interference with business relations. They asked the court to issue a temporary restraining order that would force Sarah to immediately reinstate the license, and they sought $20 million in damages for lost profits. $20 million for her protecting her own property. When my attorney Elena showed me their complaint, I shook my head. Are they serious? I asked. They think a judge will believe Sarah breached fiduciary duties when they fired her and stole her patent? They're trying to buy time, Richard, Elena replied. They need to win at least 6 months to find a new investor or sell the company to someone who won't do as deep a due diligence. They know that if the process drags on, their clients will start getting nervous. I called Sarah. Her voice on the phone was as calm as it had been that day in the boardroom. Sarah, they filed a lawsuit. They want an injunction. I know, Richard, she replied. My lawyers have already prepared a countersuit. A countersuit? For $20 million. No, Richard. For 50. I paused. 50 million? For what? For patent infringement, Sarah said. And I heard a light, cold smirk in her voice. They used my patent to produce and sell product for 2 years without a valid license. Under the law, they owe me royalties for every kilogram of polymer they sold. And since they acted willfully and maliciously, I'm demanding triple damages. Plus legal fees. I laughed. It was genius. They tried to scare her with a $20 million suit, and she just flipped the board and demanded 50. But that's not all, Sarah continued. I've also filed a motion for discovery. I want access to all their financial documents, correspondence, and internal audits. If they're so confident in their case, they have nothing to hide. Right? Sarah, I said. If you start digging into their finances, you'll find things they'd rather burn their office down than reveal. Exactly why I'm doing it, Richard. See you in court. The next month was a living hell for David and Chloe. The discovery process requires both sides to provide each other with all documents relevant to the case. For an honest company, it's just boring paperwork. For a company built on lies and theft, it's a death sentence. Sarah and her lawyers gained access to Ecopoly's servers. And what they found there was even worse than we'd thought. It turned out David hadn't just fired Sarah and stolen the patent. He'd been systematically siphoning money from the company. He'd created the fake consulting firm I mentioned earlier and transferred funds meant for raw materials into its accounts. He bought watches, cars, and paid rent for that apartment for Chloe with that money. But the most interesting part was in the correspondence. Sarah found emails between David and Chloe dating back to before Sarah's firing. In those emails, they openly discussed how they would get rid of David's wife, how they would alter the lab notebook entries, and how they would make her sign papers while she's depressed. This wasn't just a contract violation, it was conspiracy to commit fraud. When Elena showed me those documents, I knew the war was over. We were just waiting for them to bury themselves. The turning point came at the preliminary hearing. The judge, an experienced and stern man named Harrison, was considering David and Chloe's motion for a temporary restraining order. Their lawyer, a tall man with a face that cost $1,000 an hour, delivered a pompous speech about how Sarah, as a bitter former employee, was trying to destroy an innovative startup out of personal revenge. Then Sarah took the floor. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just walked up to the judge's bench and placed a thick folder on it. "Your Honor," she said in a steady voice, "the defendants claim I'm acting out of revenge. But the facts say otherwise. In this folder are the original lab notebooks proving I am the sole inventor. Here are internal Ecopoly documents proving the defendants knew this, but deliberately concealed it from investors, including Mr. Thorne's fund. And finally, here is a financial report showing that Mr. Jenkins used company funds for personal expenses totaling over $3 million. Silence fell over the courtroom. David and Chloe's lawyer went pale. He looked at his clients. David sat gripping the edge of the table, his face white as chalk. Chloe nervously twisted her necklace, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an exit that wasn't there. Judge Harrison opened the folder. He read the documents slowly, his face remaining utterly expressionless. But I could see the tension in his jaw muscles. He read about the embezzlement. He read about the forgery. He read about how two people had tried to cheat not just Sarah, but the entire market. 20 minutes later, he closed the folder and looked at the plaintiff's attorney. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, "you're asking me to issue a restraining order that would force Mrs. Jenkins to reinstate the license for a company that, based on the documents presented, is not an innovative startup, but a money laundering scheme and intellectual property theft operation. Do you really want me to do that?" The lawyer opened his mouth, but no words came out. He slowly closed it and began gathering his papers. He knew when a battle was lost. "Motion denied," Judge Harrison said, banging his gavel. "Moreover, given the evidence of fraud presented, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. The next hearing will be in 1 month. In the meantime, Mr. Jenkins, Ms. Miller, you are prohibited from selling, transferring, or otherwise disposing of Ecopoly's assets without court permission." The gavel's crack echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. It was over. David and Chloe walked out of the courthouse under the flashes of reporters' cameras, whom Sarah had kindly invited. They didn't answer questions. They just got in their car and drove away. But their problems were only just beginning. After the judge referred the materials to the prosecutor, chaos erupted. Ecopoly's office was sealed. Their bank accounts were frozen. Investors who had been ready to put in money frantically withdrew their offers. And then came what I'd been waiting for most. Chloe realized David had been lying to her too. It turned out David hadn't just stolen from the company. He'd lied to Chloe. He'd told her they had a reserve fund, that they could fight off any lawsuit. But when the accounts were frozen, Chloe discovered their joint account was empty. Moreover, she found that David had taken out several loans in her name to cover his personal gambling debts. He'd used her credit history, her name, her future, to finance his pathetic life. Chloe didn't forgive him. She hired her own lawyer and cut a deal with the prosecution. She told the prosecutors everything, every detail, every forged signature, every stolen test tube. In exchange for immunity from criminal prosecution, she agreed to testify against David. David was left alone. His lawyer, seeing that the prosecution's key witness was his own former partner and mistress, advised him to plead guilty and beg for leniency. But David, in his endless pride, refused. He went to trial, and he lost. He was found guilty on 12 counts, including fraud, intellectual property theft, and money laundering. The judge, the same Harrison, was not merciful. He sentenced David to 7 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay Sarah restitution of $50 million. $50 million, which he, of course, didn't have. This meant he'd leave prison bankrupt, with a ruined credit history and the mark of a fraudster for the rest of his life. Chloe avoided prison, but her career was destroyed. Her name was blacklisted across the industry. No self-respecting company would hire her even as a cleaner. She tried to start a consulting business, but her first clients, learning her story, canceled their contracts. She eventually left the state and, according to rumors, now works as a manager at a small hotel in Nevada. And Sarah? Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't post on social media about her victory. She simply took her patent, now completely clear of any encumbrances, and founded her own company, Jenkins Polymers. And you know what I did? I called her the day after the verdict. Sarah, I said, I promised $10 million for 20% of EcoPoly, but EcoPoly no longer exists, so I'm offering you $10 million for 20% of Jenkins Polymers. And this time, I want you to be not just the inventor, but the CEO. She agreed. Today, Jenkins Polymers is a market leader. We've signed contracts with 3 of the world's largest electronics manufacturers. Our factory runs 3 shifts. Sarah has hired hundreds of employees, and most importantly, she's created a culture with no room for intrigue, theft, or arrogance. She pays her engineers above market rates, gives them equity in the company, and always, absolutely always, checks the legal documents. I often visit her office. It's in the same building where EcoPoly used to be. But now it smells not of cheap champagne and expensive perfume, but of coffee, ozone from servers, and hard, honest work. Sometimes, when I look at Sarah, I think about how easily people lose everything because of their own greed. David and Chloe had it all. A talented inventor, an investor ready to give money, a product that could change the world. But they wanted too much. They wanted everything at once, and they thought they could cheat the system. But they forgot the main rule of business and life. You can't build a skyscraper on shifting sand. And you can't underestimate the quiet person in the corner who knows how things really work. Sarah didn't take revenge out of emotion. She didn't throw tantrums. She just used the law, logic, and their own stupidity against them. This wasn't revenge, it was a surgical operation. And it went flawlessly. If you enjoyed the story, if you felt that sweet sense of justice when arrogant villains get what they deserve, be sure to subscribe, hit like, and share it with friends. And write in the comments, what would you have done in Sarah's place? Would you have forgiven your husband if he just confessed? Or would you have sent him to prison too? I'd really like to know your opinion. Thank you for being with me. This was a story about how cold calculation and corporate literacy shattered the illusions of greedy people. See you in the next videos. Take care of yourselves, your loved ones, and always read the fine print in employment contracts.